Welcome. This is the Public Works Podcast. My name is Joseph Blackman, and today I got a real treat for you. His name is Kehinde Ojasanya, and he is a research scientist at University of Vermont and also a PhD candidate in civil and environmental engineering. Kehinde, say what's up to everybody.
Oh, hi everyone. So excited to be here today, doing this with Joseph Blackman and the Public Work podcast. So I'm Kehinde Ojasanya, a research scientist at the University of Vermont, rather. And I'm also the founder of Keloks Technologies, a startup working on a proprietary platform called Waste Texas. And with Waste Texas, we are trying to solve, and support climate resilient agriculture. Pretty much like my work sits at the intersection of wastewater engineering, resource recovery, and climate innovation, specifically transforming waste into valuable products like critical minerals and clean irrigation water. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. We're definitely going to dive into all of that. So first off, let's talk about what a research scientist is. I mean, we see in the movies, there's a researcher that they work for a college and they're like finding all the cool different things. Like, kind of tell us what a research scientist is and what I guess what your day-to-day is like.
That's an interesting question, and thank you for that. So, I'm going to talk from, my perspective and what I do basically. And for you to be able to do what I do as a research scientist, at the high level, you need 3 layers of capability. And one of it is, critical depth. You need that technical depth. And by that, as someone in civil and environmental engineering, you need to understand some civil and environmental principles, like in hydraulic fluid dynamics, for instance, in hydraulic engineering and reaction engineering, and understanding of system modeling. So for me, it extends, a bit more than that. Which means that I also need to couple some understanding in chemistry, strong background in chemistry, and understanding some reaction kinetics, some precipitation reactions like crystallization of struvite and stuff like that, which also, requires me to integrate some AI tools, understanding like system controls and all of that. So you need core and strong background, in that area, which is the technical knowledge, which I mentioned earlier. The other capability you need to survive or to thrive as a research scientist is you need that systems thinking ability, systems thinking. And as public work, they are never the problem in public works are never isolated. They are never isolated. Take for instance, wastewater treatment. It connects with agriculture. It connects with policy. It connects with climate and economics. So you need that full system understanding for you to be able to understand how to thrive, basically, for you to be able to thrive in this sector. Take for instance, do you understand the decision that sits into wastewater treatment? And take for instance agriculture, which talks about food security, for instance. How do those two worlds, how do they interact? And how does wastewater treatment, how does it interact with climate issues like greenhouse gas emissions like methane and CO2? How does these things interact? Do you understand? So this understanding, they are very critical. You need to be able to tie all of this together, for you to be able to thrive in what I do. And the last layer of capability that I think is very pivotal for you to thrive in what I do is what I call translational intelligence. translational intelligence. And by that, I mean your ability to, translate complex science into deployable solutions, And that doesn't just it's not just limited to the technical, side of things. It also means you being able to straddle between multiple worlds, like engaging with stakeholders, with investors, with, people in other disciplines. Like for me, as a research scientist, I'm juggling at the moment. I'm juggling three research projects. I'm managing different research projects, and I'm the one leading this research. So I had to engage with, experts from the medical field, from, the business point of view. So all of this requires the thing I call translational intelligence for you to be able to sit in that and, engage effectively. So to a great extent, you need some of these capabilities.
No, that's a lot, man. That's a lot. Well, and my next question is, like, again, I always think there's probably somebody younger going, oh, I want to do what Kehinde does, or I want to, I want to be in Kehinde's position at some point in their career. So how do they develop themselves into the Kehinde? Give us your career path, kind of where you started, and then how you made it to where you are today to develop those capabilities.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting question. And for me, my passion for, let me say, resource recovery was shaped by lived experience. I had my formative years in Nigeria, and I've been, across the world. As a matter of fact, I've lived in South Africa. In my journey, at some point, I was working as a research scientist at the University of Johannesburg, in South Africa. I almost, mistaken that for University of Vermont when I was, at the start of my introduction. So I've been around, and at some point I was in England as well. As a matter of fact, I moved from England to the US about 2 years ago and some extras. All of what I've been doing has been investing so much in research, studying, at the micro level of environmental problems and profound solutions. So as I said earlier, my passion, was shaped by lived experience. I've been in an environment where we couldn't, see waste as a resource stream, whereby we only treat waste as every other person treats waste, as though, yeah, it is waste, just discard it. However, that's a reactive way of dealing with waste, but a lot of shifting, and we need to shift our mindset into, circular economy, and that talks about elimination of waste, and you're closing the loop pretty much, closing the loop, which is all about regenerative actions. So for me, I've had the privilege to be in different settings that, pretty much strengthen and give me a level of traction for this particular field that I'm working on in my PhD and even as a research scientist, which is resource recovery. Basically, we are extracting and valorizing waste. We're extracting valuable materials, from waste. And let me build a more solid context to that. Take, for instance, in the US, currently there's a global demand for critical minerals, otherwise called rare earth elements. And a lot of people, a lot of countries, they are looking at secondary sources, like wastewater streams and landfill leachate. As a matter of fact, landfill leachate has significant amount of these critical minerals. It houses a lot of these critical minerals. And at the moment, the US, currently relies on foreign suppliers for 100% of 12 critical minerals. And also they depend heavily on, foreign suppliers for 28 others, which threatens, the technological sovereignty of the country and pretty much put us at risk, economically. So my focus, which is in resource recovery, for me, I believe the country has the expertise, has the intelligence to be able to come up with scalable and innovative, technologies that can help recover some of these critical minerals from secondary sources like wastewater and other secondary sources. Do you understand? So those things, they were attractive to me right from the onset. Like when I was working in South Africa as a research scientist, those were things I actually worked on. There's something called acid mine drainage, and you can actually recover, some of these rare earth element, critical minerals from these waste streams as well. So I built this capability based on those experiences I had, those projects I was opportune to jump on, and I kept on strengthening, that passion, and that expanded much more and got me to the UK, where I was also working in environmental problems. Then I transitioned from England, down to the US, and as a matter of fact, I got multiple opportunities. I just decided to pick the University of Vermont, and to be honest, I've been enjoying it. I enjoy what I do, even though it comes with significant struggles, and you have to be able to sit under great weight, but all of it makes the journey gratifying. So for me, that's critical.
Yeah. Speaking of the journey, was like 12 or 14-year-old Kehinde, were you looking at the latrine or looking at poop and going, man, we could get some stuff out of this? Like, what got you going down this route in the first place? You could have been a rocket scientist. You probably could have played basketball, or soccer, but what got you going down this route of being a research scientist from a young age?
That's an interesting question. And, for me, I think one thing that has been like an anchor for me is clarity. And there's a popular saying that says, when you know better, you do better. And that sink into what I'm about to say is that at a young age, I've been very curious. I'm that curious kid that wants to explore everything. At some point in my formative years, I was juggling, or I was in between multiple options. I was thinking of, going or becoming, an architect at some point. At some point, I was thinking of becoming a medical doctor. At some point, I knew that my passion, lean into engineering because of some of the things I effortlessly do, and by that I mean some things are easy for me to do, but it's difficult for others, So I look into all of those, those accumulated into passion, into my ultimate passion at the end of the day, and those were things that actually led me to where I am today, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. No, for sure. Well, being a research scientist, what's kind of the, I would say, the deliverable? Because you're doing research, you're looking for things, you're looking for efficiencies, you're also looking for inefficiencies. What's kind of the pace? Is it like a quarterly, hey, I got a PowerPoint presentation to my, to the University of Vermont or my backing to say, this is what I found in the last quarter? Like what does that kind of look like? Because when you do work, you normally have to report to somebody or something.
Absolutely.
So can you explain that part?
Yeah, sure. That's very important, for the audience to understand what we do as research scientists. So basically, as a research scientist, you obviously will have, a senior colleague, otherwise called advisor, in the academic settings. You have an advisor that you report to. Pretty much like you are working under that advisor. The advisor necessarily doesn't have to have the whole technical expertise or have the whole knowledge, the domain knowledge of that particular research. However, the advisor can see from an helicopter view, from an elevated position, and give you necessary guidance to be able to execute and, conduct necessary experiment needed for the deliverables. Like, I'm going to give you an instance. At the moment, one of the research I'm working on, requires me to conduct experiments to monitor microplastics, emerging contaminants, in the Lake Champlain drainage basin here in the state of Vermont. And essentially what we are trying to do is to characterize, microplastics across, diverse stormwater samples. So we have the agricultural stormwater, we have the urban stormwater. These are samples that we collected. And we are also working in collaboration with another company called Stone Environmental. These are like the major collaborators. We also have other collaborators on this particular research because, it's research funded by EPA, and other guys from USGS, they work on this research as well. They are, exploring other emerging contaminants. Some guys are exploring PFAS and, pharmaceutical contaminant. So, but essentially for us, which I'm the one leading, we are working on microplastics. So we are characterizing microplastics, and they are monthly deliverables, they are quarterly deliverables, and the way you deal with that, from the research scientist perspective, is to be able to understand project management. You must be able to manage your time very well, set your priorities well, and leverage everything that you have at your disposal. Like I have undergrads, working for me. So I need to, lay out the protocol for them. I need to be sure that they understand what the protocol says, in order not to create a disaster at the end of the day for them to be able to do what they ought to do, So you need that domain knowledge, to be able to guide, and more importantly, to be able to drive the project, which is the most important, for you to be able to drive the project from point A to point B, which means from the beginning to the end. And how that will be possible is to be able to manage your time effectively and set out the priorities, understand the deliverables, and put everything in perspective. That's how you journey through that.
No, I appreciate you answering that, because I've always been curious. Also, another aspect of it, like you said, you're working with other research companies, other research scientists. You're working with undergrads. What's some of the pros and cons with working with, let's just say, undergrads? They're going to be at the school for 3, 4, 5 years, maybe. This isn't their big boy job. They're not going to be doing this forever. So it's kind of transitional. Like, what are some of the pros and cons? Like, how do you motivate somebody to do the best that they can do when they know this isn't all they're going to be doing for the rest of their life? And then also, how do you get somebody to say, hey, you've done well, you need to move on to bigger and better things, after helping out with like microplastics with Kehinde?
Yeah, that's a good question. And one thing I use, or one of my own strategies, in dealing with this, or navigating, people of, don't let me say lower understanding, but people with less domain expertise. One of the things I do is, first of all, give them clarity and let them know how this can actually drive a component of advancement for them as an individual. Like, let me break it down a bit more. Like, if there's no component of advancement in anything you're doing, you are likely going to, stop doing that thing. Meaning that if there are no, rewards, I tell people time and again, there's no true altruism in life. If you know that there's nothing in for you, you are likely going to give up, before you get to the finish line. So what I do for my undergrads is to motivate them, like, let them see why this is important and how this even, sits into building their competency. Like, even if they're not going to work on, extraction of microplastics from some water samples, for instance, even if they are going to move to or transition into a different field, but the expertise, the resolve that build, while it breaks up, the resilience that it build is going to stay with them. The knowledge how to deal with complexities, that inevitably they are going to encounter, how to deal with all of that would remain with them, and that would, help them transition into anything that they are transitioning into any, job position that they are moving into. And for me, I tell them as well, every action you take is a rehearsal for mastery. Like if you are thinking that I'm not harsh on you, because I try not to be so harsh on these undergrads. I try to give them their freedom, like even ask them, oh, what time works best for you, for you to come to the lab. I don't want to impose things on them. And I found out that really, gives them that freedom and motivates them. However, there's a downside to that as well. A lot of times, because these undergrad, they are very naive, and that can lead to some things that might lead to them taking you for granted. Like, oh, it's not too harsh on us. So you need to also have a very strong fist, and at the same time be lenient at the level, so that you can get the best out of them, and also make them comfortable enough, in learning what they have to learn. And at the end of the day, what I prioritize much more is that they gain something, from whatever I'm asking them to do. They are not just doing blind experiment. They are not just conducting, blind experimental work or something they don't love to do. I try to motivate them, and more importantly, I give them credit. Like if I present a work that they've helped me with, I give them credit. I shout, I give them a shout out, on LinkedIn, on different, conferences, and let them know, oh, this research, was driven as a result of these other guys, and that and that. So
Yeah.
for me, that's how I keep them motivated.
Sure. And then what advice would you give to somebody who's in an undergrad position right now? They're working for or with a research scientist right now. What do you say to them to knock it out of the park so they can set themselves up for success after they graduate?
Yeah, that's a good question. And one thing, for what I'm going to, advise, my advice to such undergrad would be that they leverage, the opportunity that they have. They try to sieve out everything in that opportunity, which is time constrained. By that I mean, you won't be in school forever. You won't be in school forever. Even on that research, you have maybe a semester or two to
that's
wrap up.
it? A semester?
Exactly. Yeah, some research are just for a semester and they are done. And for some it goes, all through the year. So all of those timelines will be laid out, prior to the start of the research. So you want to get the best out of that moment, and by so it's you're going to get good value, for yourself. It's going to add to your credibility. You can add those experiences to your CV, and it's going to position you as a competent expert in that field. So for me, I'm going to say, get the best out of the opportunity. Try to sieve out the best from that opportunity, which is very critical.
For sure. One of I would say the complexities in research is time. Simulating time. When I think of microplastics, like, yes, we know there's microplastics, but we don't know what they look like in 100 years. We don't know what they look like in the human body for 200 years. We don't know what they do, in society for 500 years. So how, as a research, scientist, do you simulate time to know what harm something could cause or the harm that it won't cause to somebody?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and it's I'm going to go a bit into the technical part of things. So one thing about microplastics, they have emerged as a growing environmental concern, and why that is because of the fact that the moment these contaminants are released, they interact with the environment, and they pose potential ecological and human health risk. And as a matter of fact, microplastics, they have high adsorption capacity, meaning that microbes, bacteria, they can sob on, on these microplastics. And because they are tiny particles, as a matter of fact, microplastics are, within the range of 1 micron to about 5 millimeters, about 5 millimeters, so they are very tiny, 1 micron is about 100 nanometer. So at times you can't even get to see them.
Yeah.
So, and there are ongoing research, like take for instance, there's a research that proposed that the human brain has about 5% of microplastics. There's another research that also says that the chewing gum, the chewing gum we eat, at some point due to the abrasion, when you're chewing with your teeth, it leads to abrasion. And and that's release microplastics. It release certain microplastics, and these plastics, they have different densities. They have different densities, which makes them thrive in certain environment. Take for instance, low density microplastics like polyethylene, polypropylene, and the likes. They remain suspended in medias, in water samples, and our body is filled with 70% of our body is water. So we can talk about sink, the sink storage, like the long-term storage of microplastics. They essentially, they go to the sediment area, the sediment interface, and for less dense microplastic, they settle, in the fluid media, like in the clear water media. So things like that, they are very exciting though, but if we understand the mechanism, their transport mechanism, their feed and transport, that would help us tackle these problems much more. Yeah.
so still on the thread of microplastics, how has Kehinde adjusted your home life in regards to what in regard to microplastics? Are you using plastic cups or glass? Are you using a wooden cutting board or the plastic cutting board? Are you drinking out of water bottles that you get from the store? Are you drinking tap water? Give us some of the things that you've done since you're the expert in microplastics, how you've adjusted your life.
Yeah, good. This brings it on for me. And as a matter of fact, I've orientated my wife, on all of these things. So she's pretty much like an expert when it comes to microplastics and even PFAS. I've told her, oh, this thing, having like pressure pot and some pot that has some particular layering inside, these things can leach PFAS, and I've given her some understanding on how abrasion, could lead to the release of microplastics, for instance. So, and that ladies, women generally, they are very methodical when it comes to stuff, So as a result of the knowledge I've given to her, we've eradicated every form of plastics in the home. So
Really?
Exactly. We've done justice to that, and
Wow.
we use glass containers, and even the pots that we used initially before all of this, they add some coating inside, and my wife had to take them out completely.
No way. What about the spatulas? You flipping your eggs.
So we use wooden and steel spatulas and spoons at home now.
Yeah, and sometimes I guess when you're like you have that voila moment in your lab coat, you're in the research facility, it's 2 a.m. You have this realization, you finally figure it out. What goes through your brain on saying, okay, if I were to tell the world this, how many industries will be disrupted? How many people will be out of a job because they can't sell water bottles or plastic cups, or how many lives will be adjusted or changed because of the research that you've done? Like, is there ever a moment you go, man, like I found this out, but it's going to ruin and disrupt a lot of our economy or the way of life for certain people?
Yeah, that's a good one. And what I'm going to say is that the moment a lot is at stake to lose, there's so much at stake than the benefit. I think you should go for that. For me, one of my greatest assets is the truth of my conscience. And that also leans into everything I do, including research, So pretty much like discovering some new stuff, from research, like we are looking for the research gap, and that could, relate with the method that we are using to do the research, or some new findings that we discover, which, for instance, in the aspect of microplastics, we've noticed that, from this stormwater samples, we noticed, some certain microplastics, and we can trace their sources. Like, we can invert the sources of these microplastics based on their particle size, based on their colors, based on their spatial distributions. We can infer all of those. So when we know those things, for me, I think informing the society, giving them the clarity that, yes, these are the sources or potential sources of this particular thing that can actually harm you in the long run. I think that's doing good. You're doing good to the society. You're not keeping the knowledge from them. You're keeping them aware of, things that could lead to potential cancer. Things that could lead to some, terrific diseases, and that could lead to some complexities at the end of the day. So the trade-offs, are very good. Like, if you need to throw away all of these things, get rid of them, and that would save you a lot of cost in the long run. I think that makes a lot of sense. So I believe in that so strongly.
No, I appreciate that, because I feel like we have a moral responsibility when we, like you said, when we know better, we should do better.
Absolutely.
When we know something is up, we should tell people and let them make the decision. Like you said, in your house, you eradicated all plastics. It's going to be a hard sell to tell my wife to eradicate all the plastics, but I'm going to work on it. And then how does Kehinde, how do you deal with, I guess, the bias behind research? I mean, we've seen this with, whether it's COVID or certain things that, depending on who's funding it or asking for data, could lead a scientist or somebody to find something when there could be nothing. Like, you spend 3 years doing research on something and you realize that there's nothing there. Sometimes it's beneficial to say that there's something there, just I did something, I found something. How do you not operate with that bias and stay objective?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and a very tricky one. So one thing I think is very important, because I've seen a lot of people deal with this issue, and managing it is a big challenge, because the funders, they raise the money from the society. The money didn't just fall from heaven, as a matter of fact. So they want to get value for their money, for their, financing. So pretty much I tell people, no result means no result. And no result doesn't mean you haven't done any research. At times, as a matter of fact, even when you are not getting the right result, like when the result is not forthcoming the way you expect, that could pretty much mean something on the line. It could even be revealing, something that you need to pay attention to. Do you understand? So it could be that maybe a system is sensitive to some parameters. It could mean the system is dynamic and it doesn't, capture all of your own assumptions, all of your own, modeling assumptions. And it could mean you need to pay closer attention to it. So if you are not getting the results, or pretty much you're not having some result, I want to tell you, let me emphasize the fact that it won't be that you won't get any results. You will surely get a result. It's just going to be that you are not going to get the right result. You're not just getting the right result. And I can give you, some examples. I can give you tons of examples.
No, it's like around the house when my wife says, "Hey, the internet's slow," and I go and do something to the modem. Really, I just turn it off and turn it back on. I have to explain that, I did this and I did this and I held this and I pressed this button just to make it sound more complicated because it could have just been nothing, as if like I needed to just, turn it off and turn it back on. But you were going to give an example?
Okay, yeah. I'm going to give an example of a time, back in South Africa when I was working as a geotechnical research scientist, in a civil engineering lab. And, I had this series of experiments where the output were inconsistent, meaning that the input was, same input, but different results. And that could be very frustrating for a researcher. If you've been in the lab and you're trying to optimize a process and the research is not just going well. So initially for me, I thought it was a failure in experimental control. So I had to step back a bit and look at the system deeply. And I realized that the system was revealing, something underlying, like the model assumptions, our own model assumptions wasn't captured, in the system. The system was behaving dynamically. So I had to, tweak some physical parameters like the pH, the temperature parameters, the ionic concentration and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, we were able to, what started as a failure, led to becoming the foundation of, a smarter and more adaptive system. And as a matter of fact, I presented this work, at the ASC EWRI conference in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 2024. So what I'm going to say from that experience is that at times you might be, doing some things, you're using some static assumption, but the system requires some dynamic controls, So you need to be flexible and study the effect, the micro level effect that you're seeing. And that's what makes us a scientist, because a lot of people can assume, you can rationalize things as a human being, but studying at the micro level, studying the slight changes that happens to a system, is what makes the difference. And that's how you scale an innovative technology or anything you're doing,
Yeah. Let's talk wastewater resource recovery. I know plenty of gentlemen in the industry where the wastewater is turned into biosolids and they put them in the ground and grow crops with it. I guess where's the science behind wastewater resource recovery? I guess some of the things you're researching and looking for, like, I guess what's the new frontier in regards to wastewater resource recovery?
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to tell you something. One thing that drew me to public works, first of all, is the fact that this is a sector that, quietly underpins everything, like environmental health, public health, even economic productivity. But, historically, the sector has been very reactive rather than being regenerative. And for me, I saw an opportunity to rethink public public infrastructure, and that linear shift, that shift from being linear to secular infrastructure is what pretty much excites me. And what I'm doing essentially, I'm into resource recovery. Essentially, I'm recovering resource from waste streams, from secondary sources like wastewater, as I mentioned earlier. And one interesting part of this whole process is that ideally, a lot of people, or let me say, generally, a lot of people see waste as waste. And what you're going to find in the mainstream of things, like in the wastewater sector, is treatment of wastewater, for disposal. That's what you're essentially going to find, everywhere. But people are shifting because we are moving into a new era where infrastructure must be able to do more with less resource. Do you understand? Which means that you are able to make use of what you have, the little that you have, but you are doing so much, even with the little. You understand? And that's where resource recovery comes in. It's not like a closed loop system where everything you are making use of it. You are recycling, everything. There's no waste, elimination of waste. And there's a science to that. You need to understand the science. You need to understand how to innovate, because a lot is going on. A lot is going on. A lot of countries, like in Africa and even here in the United States and across other Western countries, they are, putting up policies that encourages water reuse, and that means that there will be more there will be more emphasis on resource recovery, like making use of our waste, getting out the values in our waste. Just see it as crude oil. In crude oil, you have every other stuff. You have petrol, you have kerosene, you have naphthalene, you have all of that. The same thing in our wastewater streams. We have all of that. We have a lot of interesting critical minerals that you don't just want to imagine. They are trapped in that. So we just have to shift our focus and begin to put all of this in perspective.
Yeah, for sure. What's Kehinde's, I guess, info diet? Like, how do you get better? How do you keep researching on your own to be able to do better in your research with University of Vermont? Like, what are you reading? What are some of your Google alerts? Where do you find whatever white papers, books, interviews of people who are doing things kind of similar to what you're doing, so you can operate better in what you're doing?
Okay, good. So for me, I approach development, as a layered system. So by that I mean, like every day, on a daily basis, I ensure that I do some things, and they are my own rituals. So like I ensure that I spend about 30 to 60 minutes, reading technical papers, articles, system designs. I read something new every day. As a matter of fact, it's just part of my discipline. I try my possible best to jump on something new every now and then. Every day, it's like a daily ritual for me. So on a monthly basis, I try to sit back and recalibrate and try to look holistically. Am I fulfilling, the tasks that has been, given to me? Am I struggling with something? And I try to look at them deeply and see where I need to sort help, and things I need to leverage the expertise of others. So I'm very reflective. I call that self reflection. I do honest self-evaluation every now and then. I do that on a daily basis, and I do that on a monthly basis, and on a yearly basis I recalibrate, look at how my work, aligns with global priorities. And I mentioned at the start of this podcast, I told you I have a startup, Keloks Technologies. And part of what I'm doing with the startup is, developing a proprietary platform that I called Waste Texas. And Waste Texas basically is a mobile sensor driven wastewater treatment and resource recovery system designed, to support climate resilient agriculture. So there's a lot that I'm doing though, but I think for me, that's the way I approach my day-to-day activities and on monthly and yearly basis.
No, we'll talk about Keloks in a second. I want you to give a framework to the listeners, viewers, and myself also, like somebody who wants to do better in their research. Let's say you're researching, I don't know, how to lose 20 pounds. Let's say you're researching biosolids. You want to learn more about PFAS. You want to learn more about, pretty much anything. Because I'm a firm believer that if you can get the grammar, if you can get the framework right and how to learn, you're going to learn more efficiently, which will make you want to learn more and learn faster. So can you give us kind of the research scientist framework on how to research things to be able to learn about stuff?
That's a good question. And I think the first thing anybody, needs to put in perspective is, first of all, as a human being, we are all curious. We are curious beings, or curious higher animals, we do some things that the popular, or let me say, dogs, cats, even though those are smart, animals, they can do. So we have the capability to rationalize. When you see something, like if you observe your microphone and you see maybe some dust, you might look at it closely and try to observe what actually led to the absorption of dust on this microphone. Is there something that I need to understand? Is it that the materials that this microphone was made with has some attraction for dust, or is there something absorbing dust on this microphone? That's where curiosity comes in. So you need to be you need to brew that curiosity. Pretty much, you need to amplify that curiosity to be able to, work or do the work of a research scientist. As a researcher, you need that curiosity. That's where the job starts from. And the moment you get curious, absolutely, you get curious and you're observing problems around you. You begin to see problems. And when you now, incorporate a presence of mind into that picture, the moment you start seeing problems, and you have presence of mind, what that does to you is that you begin to create and curate, solution blueprint for what you're saying. You begin to see, oh, this thing ought not to be like this. This thing ought not to be like this, and your mind begins to pretty much amplify solution within. That's the ability of every human being. We all have that capability. It's just that we have been able to structure that ability. We've been able to study and refine that ability within the walls of academia. Do you understand? So that makes us, more competent researcher. But every human being can do that. But ours is just more structured. So now, if you allow yourself the presence of mind, you begin to see solutions naturally. You begin to see solutions. But what will guide you in betting that solution effectively, that every other, top people at the helm of affairs can listen to you, means that you need some level of clarity. You need some principles that back what you're doing. You don't just assume. Assumption is the lowest level of knowledge. You need to back your assumption, with credible hypotheses. You are not just coming up with something and saying, oh, this is what this means to you. It can mean that to you, but is that what it means in the global stream or in the mainstream of things? So your assumption must be backed up by statistics, by principles. So for me, the other thing is that you approach problems, from first principles, meaning that you understand the foundational truth of that problem. And academics, education can give you that. I tell people academics is what you're being taught. Education is what you teach yourself. So, so whichever one you're picking, that would give you advantage, and you can leverage any of that, in amplifying your ability to be able to solve problems. So when you now structure that ability and you begin to see the problem and you begin to apply principles, in curating that solution, that will lead somewhere. And you can pretty much, get the attention of people that matter, and within the academia, in the walls of in the academic space, all of those things, you need to tie them together. You need to tie them together. Like, take for instance, if I'm working on observing something, and pretty much like I'm working on a research, trying to understand the effect of temperature on a particular parameter. Okay, what does temperature at elevated temperature, what happens to this thing? At reduced temperature, what are we saying? Do you understand? If I'm working on that, I'm going to closely observe the effect of temperature and see the downside and the upside. Like, there will be a baseline control where you compare that effect that you're seeing, the new effect that you're seeing on, you compare that with a baseline experiment. And from there, you begin to talk about statistical analysis. You begin to make, generate inferences, make us insight. And those insights will guide how you, project the solution to the end users. And when you come to the community level, then you need to now decluster all of those complexities, all of those complex science into usable format, and that can lead to products that you can commercialize. At the moment, I'm working on a research that we are working on a medical equipment that will be commercialized in the state of Vermont to rural Vermonters and other underserved regions in the continental United States. So I'm the one leading the research, though. And that comes with great responsibilities. That one is also in resource recovery. I can I can go on and on, but I don't want to take too much of your time.
No, this is great. I mean, it helps. I think it helps everybody develop their own framework to do their own research on whatever they want to research on.
Exactly.
Let's talk about Keloks. At the end of the day, we all want to have something that we can kind of call our own. You started this on your own. What would you say is the problem you're looking to solve, or the problem you uncovered, then the problem you're looking to solve with your product and service?
Okay, that's an interesting question, and I'm going to make it very simple. What we are trying to do, and what I'm trying to do with this Keloks, the company, is to contribute meaningfully to society, more like offering value, to the society. That's one critical thing we're trying to do. And how we are offering the value is creating a system, that can help turn waste, pretty much wastewater, into valuable agricultural products like strobite fertilizer. We are recovering nutrients. When I say nutrient, I'm talking about, nutrient in the form of fertilizers. There are certain nutrient that makes up fertilizer, just like, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, So all of those make up fertilizer. But for strobite, strobite is a slow release fertilizer. So we are extracting this strobite, from typical waste streams. And we are also transforming that wastewater, not just creating the wastewater, we are transforming the wastewater into safe irrigation water. So we are not just doing that, in the traditional way. We are doing this with robust engineering, machine intelligence, and leveraging AI, competency. So it's a big idea. It's a movement. It's not just a typical or traditional startup. It's a movement. And I have big, crazy plans that if I begin to detail, it'll sound impossible to you.
I like those plans, man. I'm the same type of way. If you sound crazy, I feel like you're on the right track. For sure. Kehinde, this has been great, man. I feel like we could go on for 2 more hours. I want to be respectful of your time. What didn't we cover that you felt like we could have covered? Maybe some things we might have missed before we get out of here.
Okay, I think I didn't mention the impact of mentors. For me, I'm going to say, you ride on the wings of mentors. You leverage people's experience. For me, I'm not that foolish to think, when I have someone that's apply a path I'm trying to explore, and I can foster meaningful relationship with them, I want to leverage their experience. I want to leverage their expertise. I don't just want to go blindly into something new. So for me, mentors have been very pivotal in my journey thus far. And I have a bunch of them. People that I look up to, people that are like source of inspiration to me, people that have guided me in my journey, people that have helped me at some point. I call them. Alternatively, I call them, fellow travelers, people that can see you even beyond the way you see yourself, people that can spot value in you, people that can, help you figure out some things that you are not, able to see for yourself. They have the eagle's eyes to be able to capture some values in you and help you position strategically. I've been fortunate to meet those warriors, in my journey. And in the academic space, I've met, people like that. My current advisor, sits in that position, and for me, I don't give access to people, just like that. Just because I call you, you call me a friend doesn't mean you're my friend. For me, friendship in my world is a sacred responsibility. So you need to qualify to come into my space. as a matter of fact. So I don't just unguardedly give control to people. I don't give that to people, unguardedly. I give it because I know you merit it and you've earned it, pretty much. And as a matter of fact, I look for your own medals. I look for your scars. I look for what you've been able to deal with, at the higher level. So for you to be able to qualify to sit in that space of mentorship, so these are my own clusters of principles that guide the way I engage, even with friends, at that level, even with friends and mentors. And I've been privileged to ride on the wings of mentors. And one critical thing I'm going to say that mentorship has done for me is that mentors, they've helped me see that you don't just figure out a problem, you look deeply beyond the problem. You redefine the problem, and that has stayed long with me, and it has helped me position at different levels, So I think that's very critical.
No, thanks for sharing that. Kehinde, thanks for hopping on the podcast today. Thanks for sharing your wealth of information and knowledge. To all the listeners out there, make sure you share this with somebody who you think needs to hear it. Kehinde, this has been the Public Works Podcast, and thank you everybody for tuning in.